will mainstream sites ever view wrestling as equal to other things, do you reckon? Or do you reckon there'll always be that stigma?
Hey guys, this is Tempest from Wrestle Talk, and I'm reminding you to support Tom Talks Rubbish.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talk Trash, and stand back with another interview. This time, I'm joined by Alistair McGeorge, a journalist for the metro.co.uk that covers pro wrestling. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. As I said, I'm really excited to talk to you and learn from your expertise, if I'm honest. But before we get into your work with journalism, how do you first discover wrestling as a fan?
I actually got in sort of a different route. Like my first experience with wrestling was a friend from when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. He eventually, when we were 9 or 10, got a PlayStation and got the SmackDown games. And at this point, we didn't have Sky, so I'd kind of had no real introduction to it at that point. So I started learning who everyone was through the games. And then sort of eventually, as we started to get a little bit older, he started showing me bits of WCW and bits that were on telly and just like little matches and clips here and there, nothing that really kind of sunk in. And then eventually, sort of, we got Sky when I was about maybe 12, 13. And like, it sounds silly. I can't remember an exact match, but I just remember Eddie Guerrero being the one to capture me and to be the one to really sort of, capture my imagination, bring me in and help me fall in love with it. And it's not stopped from there.
So, do you think, going back to your childhood gaming wrestling fandom for a second, the reason you maybe weren't so captivated with the real wrestling, for lack of a better word, is because it wasn't as over the top as the games made it look at times?
Maybe a little, but I think a lot of it was literally just down to I didn't have much of a way to watch it. Like, I hadn't really come across, say, WCW sort of on Channel 4 or 5, whatever it was on at the time. And then WWE hadn't come on my radar at all because of not having Sky. But then as soon as that was open, and like I said, Eddie was the one who still for me is the total package. So there was the entertainment side, there was the pure wrestling side, just every part of it was there. And like I say, that was that.
So when it comes to discovering Eddie Guerrero for the first time, what sort of era/year are we talking that you finally discovered wrestling as a fan?
This would have been sort of, I think, late 2002, maybe early 2003. So it would have been about 12, 13 at the time. And so a lot of that was, I guess, eventually building up to Eddie's rise. Like the first pay-per-view I ever sort of got up to watch live was No Way Out when he won the title from Rock. I can still remember sort of waking the parents up shouting when he'd finally done it, and really getting so emotionally invested.
Did you get in trouble for that out of personal curiosity?
It was a little bit sort of, but thankfully it's they weren't too bad with it, and there was a bit where Mum said, "Are you going to grow out of it?" And I think now, considering what I'm doing, she was saying the other day actually that she's glad I didn't listen to it and just stayed into it.
So as we move on in your fandom, actually, before we do, you talked about there not growing out of it. Have you ever had an off period though, where you cut wrestling out for a little while, either due to life or just not enjoying it so much?
Not through not enjoying it. There was a little stretch at university when I was in student accommodation and didn't have access to it because of lectures. I couldn't stay up late on a Monday necessarily to watch everything, so I wasn't able to sort of even stream things. But even then, I was keeping up with it and trying to still sort of make sure I was watching it. Like I never really fell in love with it, but then, particularly as I went through university, there were friends who were into it as well, and that helped me really make time to watch it as well and rediscover the passion to such a big extent.
Do you remember what it was that helped you rediscover? I know it was Friends, but do you remember if there was a specific event that helped you rediscover the passion for it?
Not really a specific event, but there was just it's something that's kind of stayed with me for wrestling the last few years anyway, and it was the community around it. And suddenly having, because when I was watching it at school, none of my friends were into it at all by the time I was in high school and everything. So yeah, it was suddenly having that at university where I did have a few friends who were really into it, so I was able to actually chat to people about it, follow it, and yeah, which I hadn't really had a chance to do before.
Ah, cool. So the question I am always curious to know with my guests is if you discovered the wrestling you discovered today with no prior knowledge of wrestling, sorry, I'll butcher that question a bit. If you discovered the wrestling you discovered as a kid today with no prior knowledge, do you think you'd be into it? And if you discovered today's wrestling as a kid, do you think you would have gotten into it?
I think actually I would, because the main era for me was the SmackDown 6 with everyone there, and there was such a focus on obviously the in-ring action, especially with people like Eddie, Chavo, Ray, Jangle, everyone like that. And today, especially sort of Raw the last few weeks, there's been such a focus on the in-ring content. The athletes seem to be better than ever. Not to discredit anyone from the past, but
definitely not.
Like, yeah, there is that kind of real focus, especially with the premium live events, that I think there is a bit of a parallel between when I did really start getting into it to now.
Okay, so the conclusion basically is you think you would still be a fan either way, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think so, because like the things with Eddie being my first real favorite and my way into it, I've always enjoyed a big blend of everything that makes wrestling special, whether it's the comedy, the athleticism, the pure technical side. There's been so many different things that have drawn me in, so I've always been able to find something that will keep me engaged.
Okay, so when does your love of journalism come in? Is that something that happens at uni, or is it something you were always passionate about and just wanted to do at uni?
I always wanted to be a writer. Sort of initially it was an author, and when I was at school, sort of 14, 15, where they were doing a sort of career thing in a lesson, sort of asking what people wanted to do and trying to suggest things.
It wasn't that test, was it, where you have to tick certain things and it's your personality, right?
It was.
Yeah, I know the one. I know the one.
So it was going through that, and everything I was saying was geared towards writing, because that's something that I'd loved even from a very, very young age. So it kind of recommended different things, and one of the jobs was journalist, which at that point at sort of 13, 14, I hadn't given much thought to, but suddenly thought, well, we're doing work experience and things like that soon. So it was an idea to explore. So eventually went on to do it at university, and yeah, kind of it's just gone from there.
And then, correct me if I'm wrong on this, was your first job with the Mirror?
Not the very first job, but that was the first kind of full national platform. So I was originally at a website based in Wigan, actually, called Female First.
Oh, yes. I do apologize.
Yes. No, not at all. So I did, to be fair, only it was 6 months or so there where I was primarily just doing music writing for them as their sort of sole music writer, which was a lot of fun. It was straight out of university, sort of before I graduated and that kind of thing. It was as teaching finished, I went straight into that job, which was a great way to learn, sort of going straight into doing interviews with sort of big names in music, sort of going from kind of Ricky Martin, Steps, Saturdays, loads of different names there, which was, considering before that job I'd done maybe 3 interviews, and then suddenly I spent 6 months doing that and festivals, and I was editing my own work there as well. So it was a real kind of baptism of fire, but an amazing few months getting to do that.
Do you have a moment from back then that you look back on and go, knowing what I know now with the experience I have, I would have done that differently? And do you have a moment from back then that you look back on and like, that was the moment that I felt like a I'd earn my place as a journalist. I hope that made sense.
Yeah. To be fair, like I say, just some of the names, like I did the interview just say with Ricky Martin, and getting to speak to someone like that who'd, been on TV, chatted to so many journalists way further into the careers than I was, and being able to feel like I held my own. Like I've not gone back and read it in a long time, so I don't know if it actually went as well as I'm remembering it, but it's definitely one that in my head it was realizing that I'd not made it, but it was kind of a realization of already how grateful I should be for the things I was getting to do and how well I was doing at that point.
Fair enough.
And I'm trying to think in terms of doing things differently. Some of it's just come with experience. Like I was definitely a lot more nervous doing interviews at the time, which doing so many for the last few years, I still get nervous before I do them, but within sort of a minute or two, that kind of settles and I'm calm again. But back then, I was a lot more stringent with the way I did them. I'd sort of have every single question planned out word for word, and I would just go through those point by point. Whereas now I've learned that it's meant to be a conversation. You don't need to follow those points. The conversation will dictate where it goes. You need to jump on. I mean, you'll know like things that people say, to jump and follow up on those.
Yeah.
Whereas at the time I was 20, 21. So yeah, I just didn't have the experience to know to do all of those things.
Is there someone you had, maybe not at Female First, but at the Mirror, that became sort of a mentor and like you looked up to as a journalist?
Yeah, there was quite a few, but especially the Mirror, that helped me. And I know I'm going to leave people out, so I will just mention a couple who I worked with when I was doing bits of TV for them. Danny Walker, who was a fantastic help for me while I was there, and a bloke called Rob Lee, who he was doing TV at the time, and he reintroduced me to doing wrestling writing, which I'd done a little bit of Female First. Like I did a fair few interviews for Cy Rodstein at Impact, chatting to people for them. And Rob kind of got me back into doing that for the Mirror, and I did sort of for a few months. I did a review piece on Raw and covered little bits until they kind of changed the section it was under. It went under the sport team eventually. So I wasn't kind of involved in that at that point. But yeah, it was good getting to work with someone like Rob who, did help me a lot and helped me really realize that wrestling was something I could write about on this level.
You talked about having someone to help you, but how does it now feel to be in your career for so many years and have people like my good friend Dom Smith say to you that you really help him? How does that feel to hear that from other people now?
It feels surreal and makes me feel very old at the same time.
Oh dear,
Dom is older than me.
sorry.
But no, it's fine. Yeah, it's nice. Like I saw the things Dom had said when you spoke to him. Sort of, I watched the interview with him, and
Oh no.
no. Like it was first of all a fantastic interview. Second of all, I rate Dom his work so highly as well. So it was great hearing him talk about things in that context. And yeah, it was really humbling hearing the things sort of he said about me in Cardiff during that chat. Like it's not something I've quite wrapped my head around. That it's little moments where it'll be like in conversations like this where I go, oh yeah, I think 11 years since I actually finished working at Female First.
I wasn't trying to make you feel old or nothing.
No. It's just one of those that there'll be little moments where I'll go. It came up on Facebook the other day. It's been, I think, it'll be 11 years, almost to the day since I interviewed Mickie James, which was my very first wrestling interview.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing that come up as that long ago seems very strange because there was so long in between before I actually started carrying on properly with kind of wrestling journalism as well.
Mm-hmm. So you talked about someone from the Mirror helping you to realize that wrestling journalism had a place in the mainstream. Would that be the way to phrase it?
Yeah, it definitely showed there was the audience for it. There was lots of stuff because it would have been WrestleMania 30 that I kind of did as a live blog for Mirror. So we did a lot around that. Obviously, there was the sad news afterwards of Ultimate Warrior passing away. So that was a few days of where basically Mirror let me handle all the coverage. They did the same with the Hulk Hogan scandal at the time, where he'd kind of obviously, well, we know what happened with there with the.
We don't need to go there.
We don't need to go into that, but there was that story, and it was things that, was really trusted to run those kind of big stories, and Mirror really went with them at the time, and that sort of helped me realise that there definitely was the audience, which was the point I kind of made to Metro years later when I started trying to pitch to get them to take it on board.
Mm-hmm. So you talked about having to pitch to Metro, but did you have to pitch to the Mirror first of all? Or was it the sort of thing where they already had it set up and you being a fan sort of helped you get your foot in the door, if that makes sense, to do the coverage?
A lot of it was Rob, who I mentioned, because he was trying to do bits like...
Frozen?
To watch it and cover it there while I sat in the living room watching it on telly. But he was getting a lot of stuff still from Impact and interviews like that, and was nice enough to pass them on to me. So a lot of that came from him. I wasn't having to pitch too much. And once he left and there were various changes in management and that kind of thing, so like I say, that kind of shifted. They moved wrestling over to the sports desk, but there weren't really the writers that wanted to cover it on the sports desk. So I was kind of doing TV showbiz like I am now, so that kind of slipped away from me at that point. But it was good. Like I say, it wasn't something I was having to actively pitch. And even now, like the way I work with Metro, I know we'll kind of touch on that, but it was only kind of initial conversations to try and get them to set it up and run with it, sort of pitching. It's been really smooth sailing since then.
So when and why did you end up leaving the Mirror?
The when would have been 2017, sort of spring going into summer. And basically they were moving everyone down to London. It's a fairly simple one, and nothing against London people living there.
Based on your interview on Give Me a Hole, that was something you had no desire to do?
No, that's it. It just wasn't. It's not been for me. Like, I'd been down a few times to the office there, and it was nothing against the people or the office there. It was just London as a city is just a bit too much for me. I've got...
Preach.
Yeah, that's it. I've got lots of family up here. I'm fortunate enough there's a group of friends who we've known each other since we were 11, and we're all kind of based around here still. And it just, everything was here for me. So I decided that I wouldn't take the offer of moving to London. And there were sort of different jobs offered at the time in different positions. Like, it just wasn't right for me. And I explained that to them. There was no hard feelings. And I decided I took a few months off and then went freelancing and kind of, went from there then.
So you went freelance before you joined Metro. So if someone wants to set up being a freelance journalist, what are the steps they have to take? And then what are maybe some things you did in the beginning that you would advise they didn't do?
Well, so that's the thing as well. I'm still freelancing, but there's various different... The way I've kind of structured all the work is a few combinations of things, but I immediately went back into doing freelance shift work for a company called Bang Showbiz, who were a entertainment news agency, and I still work for them. I worked for them before the Mirror, left them to go full-time at the Mirror, and then when I decided I wanted to go freelance, I went back there and picked up more shifts there. They've always been fantastic with me. Especially when it comes to getting to take wrestling opportunities, interviews, anything like that. So I started doing shifts for them, and then at the same time started pitching things to Digital Spy and Metro, doing opinion pieces, sort of TV bits to try and get my foot in the door. I was fortunate that I had a lot of contacts from the Mirror who'd moved on to those places. So I was fortunate in that sense. And it was, the thing I'd say for people going into it is there's no harm in just pitching the idea and just getting it out there. You know, the worst you'll get is a few no's, but you'll get feedback, you'll get contacts. The more you do it, you'll get better contacts and build up those relationships with people. And the stuff with Metro kind of came directly from doing these TV opinion pieces that weren't entirely weren't entirely kind of in my.
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. Don't worry. Trust me, it's happened to me plenty of times doing them. And so it was just from doing those bits for Metro, those kind of freelance pieces, built up the relationship, which I knew the editor from the Mirror anyway. But by staying in touch and doing those pieces, it then led to eventually me being able to start saying, should we do some wrestling stuff? And it was easy. It was kind of, building those relationships.
Was it easier to pitch to the Metro because you had someone you knew and trusted there than it was to pitch to the Mirror, or was it about the same?
I think it was easier just having known, like I worked with the editor, like I say, at the Mirror, we knew each other well, and then I'd sort of got in touch and about doing freelance features before the wrestling stuff, and it was quite easy to get in because they knew my work. But it's weird. It's a weird one for me because every kind of job I've had in journalism has come from either work experience I did or contacts from that job passing me on to other people who then told other people. So that's another bit of advice, is just making the most of every single opportunity, because people will remember you, they will recognize the work you do, and they'll make sure other people see it and recognize it as well.
So we'll do that quickly. If you had to give 3 pieces of advice to either young journalists out there that want to cover wrestling or just something in general, and then 3 pieces of something to do, and then 3 pieces of something maybe not to do in the future.
In terms of what to do, it sounds obvious, but practicing your writing and be writing constantly is the main one. It's how you get better. Like, I've even noticed it just the last couple of years, how much I've improved with the way I've been writing a lot more than I had been doing with all the various different jobs I'm doing. So yeah, practicing your writing, making contacts is massive. And it doesn't mean, it can just be being friends with people and being friendly. Like Sai at Impact, who handles their kind of international press, I've known him for 11 years now. We've become really good friends over the last decade, and it's made our working relationship work very well. There's a good kind of rapport. It's just a case of being, it's a cliche, but treating people how you want to be treated, because people will remember that. They'll respond to that. People want to work with people they can get on with, and that doesn't mean kind of bowing down to what they want. Obviously, as a journalist, you've got to stand your ground. But it's being able to be polite with people and friendly, and build up those relationships. And I'd say also, it's knowing your worth. Like, it's important, obviously, when you're starting out and as things are going to, unfortunately, it's a reality of the business. People will have to work for free, things like that. Like I did it with Female First for a work experience thing first, and trying to think where else it was now, but it was, you will have to do bits of work for free. I did it for Bang Showbiz before I properly started getting paid for them. But it's knowing your worth, and if not letting people walk over you, I guess.
Yeah.
What you're doing is valuable, and people should get reimbursed for that.
Yeah, definitely. So you brought up Bang Showbiz a few times, and obviously you work for the Metro, covering a lot of wrestling stuff. So what are some differences in your journalism, and some differences maybe in your prep for interviews or just a story in general when you're working for Bang Show Business as opposed to when you're working for the Metro?
That's a good one. For the actual prep for interviews, it's going to be fairly similar for both. It's making sure you've done your research. It's, taking a look at recent interviews people would have done, not just kind of scrolling through a Wikipedia page, making sure you're asking different questions because they'll respond better to that. But in terms of the stories, because Bang Showbiz has lots of different clients around the world, the stories have to be able to go out on any of those clients' websites in whatever style you've written it in. So it does have to be, still be creative with it, but you've got to be mindful that it's not just for one audience, whereas Metro, they've got their own voice. For the wrestling section, I figured out my own voice for that as well, and I can write with that audience, that specific audience in mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. You talked about wrestling sections there. How do you feel like eventually wrestling will be perceived? Will we ever get to a point where wrestling is perceived as equal to, say, football or soccer in the journalism? And also, what can someone that wants to pitch to I'll say a mainstream site, but you know what I mean, about wrestling, how do you feel like they can pitch? And will mainstream sites ever view wrestling as equal to other things, do you reckon? Or do you reckon there'll always be that stigma?
I don't think I mean, it's hard to say. Like, I don't think it'd ever be up there with football just because it's such a huge cultural thing here. It's absolutely massive. I don't think it'd be touching that, but Clash of the Castle showed that there's still a massive audience for it over here. You know, more and more outlets are covering it. Even just looking at Soraya debuting in AEW, I saw that BBC picks that up.
Yeah.
Sections, and that's a big thing for an outlet like BBC, who don't really, they did a bit for Clash of the Castle, but don't really cover wrestling regularly. And for them to pick up on Soraya, I don't know, it was kind of because they had the angle of it was someone from England who's become this huge star and has now moved on, but I think it's still pretty telling that it's on their radar, and more publications are doing it now. Sort of The Sun are covering wrestling to some degree, The Mirror, The Star, Independent as well. Like, there's a lot of outlets who are giving it time. It's just hopefully they start to put money behind it and really push with it, because when the work's put in, the audience is there, it can grow. You just need to kind of run with it.
Yeah, I agree. So before we wrap this up, we're going to do a very quick segment that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before will know this, where I ask my guests their favorite match, favorite pay-per-view, favorite wrestler's theme, favorite tag team, and favorite superstar of all time. Basically questions that Alistair might get asked on social media quite regularly. So now he'll have a place to be like, look, I've answered this. Please go watch this. So what's your favorite match of all time?
Favorite match of all time, off the top of my head, I'm going to stick with Eddie Guerrero and say him and Angle at WrestleMania. It was just an incredible match. The ending with Eddie loosening his boot to kind of help roll Angle up was genius. It fit the character. It was an incredible match up to that point. It just, really special one.
Favorite pay-per-view of all time?
ECW One Night Stand in 2005. Even though I never watched the original ECW at the time, sort of, I was too young and definitely wouldn't have been allowed. But the atmosphere, the crowd, the variety of matches on the show, just everything. It was, even for somebody who wasn't around the first time, you could feel that it was a special night, and the in-ring action was incredible.
Favorite wrestler's theme of all time?
So I love anything with a little something at the beginning where you know it's them. And I mean, it's an obvious one, but I think Time Is Now by John Cena is pretty much there. It's got the horns that you need. It's got that little bit you can sing along to. I mean, there's loads like that, like Shinsuke's. Triple H's Cult of Personality is another one with the little bit of feedback and then into the riff. Anything like that.
I love how AEW's changed that from WWE, by the way. They've changed it slightly. I did really enjoy that. I'll say that. Yeah,
you got to put little twists on it. Yeah, I thought they did that fantastically well.
Favorite tag team of all time?
I'm going to say Hardy Boys. Like, from playing as them in the games, like I said at the beginning, to just seeing them together. I was there at Mania 33 when they came out for the return. There's just so many incredible moments. So, I'm going to say Hardy Boys.
And then finally, who is your favorite wrestler or superstar of all time? I think I can guess, but I'm gonna let you say it anyway.
Well, funnily enough, Eddie Guerrero again. I know
Yeah.
I've talked about him a lot, but yeah, it all goes back to him. And he was actually one of the first bits of writing I did. I was doing a work experience when I was 14, 15, no, would have been 15. I think, yeah, 15. And he'd just died.
Oh,
And
goals.
we did, yeah. And I wrote sort of an obituary tribute piece to him, which was the first kind of bit of writing I'd done really in that realm. So a morbid way to start it, but it's kind of that's been a thread through everything, really.
Fair enough. As we wrap this up, I have a bit of a selfish question. From one interview to another, where can I improve? What did I do well, etc.?
I'm not just going to kind of blow smoke. I genuinely, it's been fantastic. You've made me comfortable, which is the main thing I try and do as an interviewer as well. It's felt quite a lot just like a conversation, which is important. You'd mentioned it's clear you'd watched that video with Don, so you'd done your research. The questions were well thought out. It's been interesting. Like I think that's not. This isn't to try and sound patronising. You're good at what you do, and it's great seeing it from this side, sort of firsthand, how good you are at it.
I really appreciate that, man. Like, I just to a small thing. I reached out to Dom for that interview for that Borough one, and I was like, he can say yeah, he can say no, and he said yeah. I was really proud of that one. I watched it back the other day. It was like, I'm really proud of that. But as we wrap this up, this might be a different question for you, but the question I end all my interviews on is with writing, in your case, with YouTube and podcasting. We're all sort of gonna live forever in some sort of way. So what is one article or maybe video that you want to be remembered for? And then what is one that you're like, if you could avoid that, I would appreciate it.
Oh, that's a tough one. I'll start on the least favorite, so we end on a high. But least favorite is kind of, even with interviews, the main thing is always less pieces, but more for me with interviews. There's always a question I think of just after the interview, or maybe a day later.
I know full well when I'm editing this back, I'll be going, damn, I should have asked him this.
We'll do it again, man. We'll do another, definitely. But yeah, so that kind of thing. But then, not a wrestling one, but there's one piece that will, not the piece itself, but I got asked at the Mirror to do a feature. It was kind of one of those lists, and it was the biggest Hollywood flops or something. And I was asked to do it by an editor, so I did. And I was told who they wanted including in it. And lovely Matt Lucas was in that list, which I didn't really agree with because I never really thought of him as a flop. So anyway, I did it. He saw the piece and did a tweet saying something like, thanks to Mirror for calling me a Hollywood flop, but I've never had the ambition. I just like the weather. And
that's brilliant.
And it was brilliant from him. But then the amount of tweets from kind of fans who were just like having a go at me for it and things like that. And, you never want to make anyone feel bad with the piece you write. And that one, yeah. I mean, there's been little bits just because I'm more the entertainment side. There will be fans of, written about One Direction in the past, and that can be a tricky one. Yeah, so you've had that, and there's things like that. So it's those kind of pieces, but that, like I say, ones when they're written and you realise that's another thing. I guess for journalists, you can't be biased. You've got to write the truth, but it's also important. I know Alistair Black's been talking about Malachi Black. Sorry, has been talking about this recently, but remembering that there's real people behind everything you're writing.
Yeah.
Which it's a big thing. And that kind of brings it in terms of favourite content. I'll come to my favourite. I've got a definite favourite headline outside wrestling, but in terms of work, I've managed to do a lot of interviews and pieces in and out wrestling about mental health and really getting into important topics, which I always want to make sure that the interviews aren't just ticking through best matches or that kind of thing. Like I want it to be able to actually do something and help people and, delving into different things. Like even I did an interview with Damien Priest and he spoke about his stage fright that he gets and the nerves he has. And just getting that out into the world so that people can learn that, you know, even these big, large and live characters are going through the same things everyone else are going through.
Yeah.
The stuff like that I'm kind of quite proud of. And on a more light-hearted note, I did a piece for The Mirror, which don't know if I get away with any more, but it was in the middle of David Cameron's Piggate thing. Well, so, and it also happened to be when Kermit and Miss Piggy had broken up. And I'm a huge Muppets fan.
Yeah.
You know, hit me hard. But anyway, and The Mirror had given me one afternoon and said, "Oh, could you write this story? It's Kermit and Miss Piggy talking about why they'd broken up." And it was just a silly interview on Jimmy Fallon, something like that. And I was like, yeah, fine. But we ran it as Kermit and Miss Piggy reveal real reason for breakup during David Cameron's Piggate scandal. I made it very clear quite early on that no, David Cameron did not have relations with Miss Piggy.
No.
But it was just getting that published and ran on a national newspaper's website was a silly one, but I was very glad we got that out there.
Oh, wow.
You know, you can have fun with it.
Yeah, and I think, just quickly, that's something that journalists have to remember as well. Make things fun. People aren't going to want to read them if they're this generic. I know a lot of my interview is quite generic at times, but it's like, I ask that generic questions in a fun way because it's like, hopefully that will help you not having to answer them in the future.
Yeah. No, that's it. It's realizing the time and place. Like sometimes with writing an interview, and there'll be a time where it has to be really serious, you know, dealing with sensitive topics, sort of really emotional issues, things like that. But then there's also times where you can just be silly. Like I chatted very quickly before we were like I chatted to Mia Yim fairly recently, not long after she'd rejoined Impact. And for parts of it, we were talking about things that her and Keith Lee had been through and, you know, some fairly difficult stuff. But then we ended the interview with sort of, I ask a lot of people about the most embarrassing moments in the ring. And she was talking about being in the ring with someone who she didn't name, but who wet themselves in a match.
Oops.
And yeah, but we'd had like, and it was just finding a little balance. Like we'd had the really serious stuff that was so important to talk about and get out, but then there was still time by the end to have those light-hearted moments. Like the interview don't have one thing or another.
Yeah, but as we wrap this up, obviously I do want to say thank you for coming on. But where can the good people find you and or your content?
I'm on Twitter at Alistair McG, and I'm trying to make a resolution to actually use Twitter a bit more because I kind of avoid it to not get too bogged down in it and have a bit of a separation. But I'm trying to make sure I at least chat about wrestling more now. So on that, and metro.co.uk/tag/WWE. Kind of everything goes up there. Sort of WWE, AEW, Impact, all falls under that banner. So yeah,
it's well worth doing, guys. So if you guys like this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. It's Tom Talk Trash. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talk Trash. Follow bodyslam.net with Cassidy Haynes wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube for our show, the WrestleWatch Podcast, and follow the WrestleWatch Pod on Twitter to help us pick the match that we're going to watch every week. And I will see you in the next one. A goodbye.